When I saw him flipping through my phone, my heart skipped, not from fear of being caught, but from the messages he was about to see. The ones I had forgotten to delete. I tried to snatch the phone back, but he pulled it away skillfully and kept reading. I watched his face change, line after line, feeling my world crumble in seconds. Yes, he was about to find out the truth. But not all of it. His hands trembled as he scrolled, and I knew the moment was coming, the moment he'd reach the message that would shatter my life. The one message that would explain everything and put a definitive end to it. Or maybe confuse him even more. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in his hands, and a new notification lit up the screen. I saw his face turn pale as he read the sender's name. He froze. Didn't even blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, an old habit when I was nervous. I heard his breath quicken, even across the 2 meters between us. This was what I feared most. Because 3 months ago, I made a mistake that changed everything forever, and now. I didn't know what to do, but let me tell you how it really happened. Before I share the secret I tried so hard to hide, write in the comments where you're watching from, and answer this: have you ever had a secret you desperately tried to keep, but it slipped anyway? I never imagined that moving to a new house could feel like stepping into a void. The quiet was so thick it pressed against my skin, wrapping me in a silence heavier than any noise I'd known before. The walls of our new home were bare, freshly painted but empty, much like the space growing between my husband and me. He was busy, too busy, unpacking boxes, meeting contractors, and planning renovations, while I wandered through rooms that felt colder with every step. I tried to imagine this place as our fresh start, but the air tasted of distance, and my reflection in the windows seemed like a stranger. Days slipped by in a blur of domestic tasks, but I was ghosting through it all. My hands planted flowers in the garden, but my mind wandered far away, to memories of when our marriage had spark, when laughter was easier, when his eyes held warmth. Now, his presence was a series of missed glances and distracted nods. The bed felt vast and hollow at night, the sheets stiff with absence. One afternoon, while trimming the hedges, I noticed movement from the neighboring yard. A man, our neighbor, as I learned later, was fixing a broken fence. His hands moved with steady ease, and when our eyes met, he offered a simple, genuine smile. No pretense, no judgment, just a man acknowledging another. That small connection stirred something in me, a flicker amid the growing shadows. Over the following days, he appeared more frequently, under the pretense of helping with the garden or lending tools. Each time, I felt the walls inside me shift, cracks forming where loneliness seeped through. His presence was a balm, soft and unassuming, yet it pried open parts of me I thought long sealed. I caught myself anticipating his visits, my pulse quickening at his casual touch on my arm, the easy laugh we shared under the open sky. At night, alone in the quiet, I questioned these feelings. Was it guilt or hunger? Was it longing or weakness? The answers tangled and slipped away like smoke. I lay awake, tracing his face in the darkness, feeling the weight of my silence between us. The new house, the fresh start, they both seemed like illusions now, shadows hiding the truth I dared not speak. Yet, as the days grew shorter and the evenings colder, the void within me grew too vast to ignore. And with it, the realization that this empty house was not the only thing that needed fixing. My husband had barely been gone for 2 hours when I saw him again. He was standing near the fence, adjusting a broken hinge on the gate between our properties. It was early evening, the kind of soft dusk that made everything look gentler, sadder. I stood on the porch, holding a watering can, not because the plants needed it, but because I needed a reason to linger outside. He looked up and caught my eye, smiled again, the same quiet smile that had unsettled me days ago. He called out something about the weather, something ordinary, but I barely registered the words. I just nodded and stepped closer, down the porch steps, as if led not by decision but by drift. We stood at the border of our yards, casual, like neighbors should be. But there was an undercurrent between us now, an awareness that hadn't been there before. He offered to help me carry some bags of soil I'd left by the side of the house. I agreed, though I could have done it myself, and walked ahead, aware of his footsteps behind me, too aware. The silence between us as he lifted the bags wasn't awkward, but thick with something unnamed. Once inside the garden, we found ourselves talking again, easily, lightly, as though we'd known each other for longer than a handful of days. I learned he had grown up in this town, moved away, then returned after his divorce. There was no bitterness in the way he said it, just fact. That struck me. My own marriage wasn't broken, but it was suspended in something less than love, more than comfort. I told him, without quite meaning to, that I used to paint. He asked why I stopped, and I didn't have a real answer. Life, I said. Children. Time. Things. He didn't press. Instead, he looked around and said my garden had a kind of composition to it, like a canvas. I laughed, a sound that felt strange coming from me. I hadn't laughed that way in years, not with him, not with anyone. We ended up sitting on the low wall near the hydrangeas. The sun dipped lower, and the colors shifted. My hand rested on the stone between us, and his hand found it, gently, as if asking rather than taking. I didn't move away. I should have, but I didn't. He looked at me, not like men look when they want something, but like he was trying to remember the way my face changed when I smiled. That made it worse, or better, I'm not sure. I felt heat in my chest, then in my throat, not desire exactly, but a rush of being seen, of being fully present. He leaned in slowly, like he knew this moment would hang in the air for a long time afterward. And before I could stop it, before I could talk myself out of it, we kissed. It was brief. Gentle. But nothing after it felt the same. We both pulled away almost at the same time, as if remembering ourselves. He looked down, exhaled, said nothing. I stood up quickly, brushing dirt from my hands that wasn't there. The silence had changed. It wasn't thick anymore, it was electric. I mumbled something about dinner, about needing to go inside. He nodded. I turned and walked back toward the house without looking back. My knees felt soft, my spine too straight. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing too fast. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection. My lips were flushed, not from the kiss itself, but from what it meant. I didn't look guilty. I looked startled, as if someone had shaken me awake. That night, I cooked pasta, but I didn't eat much. The house felt too large again, but in a different way. Not empty, now it was full of echoes. I sat at the table long after the food had gone cold. My phone buzzed. A message from my husband, flight landed. Heading to the hotel. I replied with a thumbs up. That was all I could manage. Anything more would require honesty I wasn't ready to touch. I wandered through the house, touching objects as if they might tether me. A framed photo of us on the mantel. My scarf on the banister. Everything was in its place, but I wasn't. Later, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The kiss wasn't about the man. It was about me. About remembering I still had skin that could feel, a pulse that could race. That frightened me more than anything. I tried to justify it. Tried to tell myself it was just a moment, a lapse. But the truth was more dangerous, I had wanted it. I had stood there and let it happen. Worse, I hadn't regretted it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. When I finally fell asleep, it wasn't restful. My dreams were fragmented, garden paths, a hand on mine, my husband's face blurred by light. And in the morning, when I woke up alone, the pillow beside me still cold, I realized I had crossed something. Not a line, exactly, but a threshold. There would be no going back. The following morning carried with it a strange sort of heaviness, like the sky hadn't quite decided whether to rain or shine. I moved through the kitchen in silence, making coffee that I didn't want, staring out the window as if the garden might offer answers. It didn't. The hydrangeas looked the same. The soil was still damp from yesterday's watering. But something inside me had shifted, even if the outside world remained stubbornly still. I didn't know how to behave, how to continue as though nothing had happened. That single moment, that kiss, echoed louder than any conversation I'd had in weeks. It wasn't just about what it meant between him and me. It was about what it meant for me and the life I'd constructed so carefully over the years. I wasn't impulsive. I wasn't reckless. And yet, here I was, carrying the memory of something I couldn't undo. I tried to immerse myself in housework, clinging to familiar tasks like they might scrub the unease off me. I cleaned the counters twice, swept the floor even though it didn't need it, rearranged the spice rack. But no amount of order could settle the chaos within. By noon, I received another message from my husband. A photo of a meeting room, a comment about how exhausting the trip already felt. I responded with a smiling emoji and a hang in there, but my fingers lingered on the screen longer than necessary. I wondered if he sensed something different in my tone, in my timing. Probably not. In the afternoon, I walked into the village to buy bread and milk. The streets were quiet, lined with trees just beginning to yellow for autumn. At the market, the woman behind the counter greeted me warmly. She commented on how well I looked, said there was a glow about me. I laughed it off, said it must be the fresh air. But inside, my stomach twisted. On the walk home, I passed his house. His truck wasn't in the driveway, and I felt something between relief and disappointment. It would have been easier if he were out, if I didn't have to decide whether to acknowledge him or pretend we were still just neighbors. Back inside, I tried to paint. I hadn't touched a brush in over a year, but today, the impulse to express something, anything, felt overwhelming. I set up my easel in the guest room, near the window, and dug out an old set of acrylics. My hand trembled as I dragged the first line across the canvas. It wasn't good. It wasn't even coherent. But it was mine. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor, I heard footsteps outside, firm, deliberate. A knock at the door followed. Not loud, not hesitant. Just present. I hesitated, wiping my hands on a cloth, heart pounding harder than it should. When I opened the door, he stood there, holding a small box of tomatoes. "Thought you might like some," he said, his voice steady, eyes not quite meeting mine. I stepped aside, let him in without a word. We moved to the kitchen, and he placed the tomatoes on the counter like an offering. I thanked him, but neither of us addressed what hung in the air between us. We talked about the garden again. About the soil, the season, the frost that would come too soon. Safe topics. Neutral. But our words were placeholders, covering the silence with sound. Then, in a pause between sentences, he asked, "Are you all right?" I looked at him, surprised by the question's simplicity. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I don't know what to do with all of this." He nodded, as if he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. He didn't try to explain or comfort. He just stood there, present, and in some odd way, that helped more than any reassurance could have. When he left, I didn't follow him to the door. I stayed in the kitchen, fingers brushing the edge of the counter where he had rested his hand. I tried not to think about how easily one touch could change everything. That night, I slept in my robe, sitting up in bed with a book open and unread in my lap. My mind wandered in loops, questions without answers, guilt without clarity. I hadn't told anyone. Not even myself, not really. But I could feel the shift inside me, a quiet rebellion against the numbness I had carried for so long. In the days that followed, I avoided him. Not in a harsh or deliberate way, but in a way that made sense to both of us. I changed the hours I tended the garden. Closed curtains earlier. Pretended I had errands when I saw him outside. He didn't press. He didn't show up unannounced. There was something respectful in his distance. But also something that made me miss the presence I hadn't asked for. I kept painting. The strokes got bolder, the colors deeper. I didn't recognize the images taking shape, but I recognized the feeling they gave me. A sense of movement. Of possibility. One evening, just before sunset, I saw him standing at the edge of his property. He didn't wave. Neither did I. But we both stood there for a long moment, still as trees. And I wondered if he felt it too, the invisible thread that still connected us, thin and fraying, but unbroken. I went back inside, not because I didn't want to talk, but because I wasn't sure I could handle where the conversation might go. I needed more time. To understand what I wanted. Who I was becoming. But I knew this much, something had changed. Not just between us, but inside me. And it was only the beginning. I hadn't expected to see him that morning. The sky was still gray, mist clinging to the corners of the windows, and I was standing by the sink rinsing a glass when I saw him through the fogged pane. He was walking toward the back gate with a cardboard box in his hands, something bulky, wrapped in cloth. I didn't move. I watched him come closer, and for a brief moment, I felt like hiding. But I didn't. I opened the door before he could knock. I found something in the attic, he said, his breath visible in the cool air. Thought you might want it. He stepped inside only when I nodded. We didn't exchange any other words right away. The silence didn't feel strained. It just sat between us like another presence in the room. He placed the box gently on the kitchen table and unwrapped it. Inside was an old wooden mirror. The frame was cracked at one corner, the silvering on the glass had worn away in places, giving it a soft, clouded look. It reminded me of you, he said simply, his eyes not meeting mine. I didn't know how to respond. Something about the mirror made me feel exposed, not in a physical sense, but as though I were being seen in ways I didn't fully understand. I ran my fingers along the frame, over the chipped edge. Why? I asked quietly. He shrugged. It's weathered. But still holds the light. I looked up then, met his gaze, and for a second it felt as if time folded. No sounds from the street. No ticking clock. Just two people standing in a kitchen, in a house that didn't quite feel like home. I thanked him, finally, my voice smaller than I intended. He smiled, not the same one as before. This one was softer, more cautious. Like he understood we were standing on unstable ground. He left shortly after, and I spent the rest of the morning sitting at the table with the mirror beside me. I studied my reflection in its warped glass, fragmented, imperfect, but somehow more real than the woman I saw in the bathroom every morning. Later that day, I took the mirror upstairs and placed it in the guest room beside my easel. It seemed to belong there, among half-finished paintings and forgotten canvases. The following days passed with a quiet rhythm. My husband called regularly. His voice was always the same, factual, tired, polite. He didn't ask how I was feeling, and I didn't volunteer anything. We talked about logistics, about a plumbing issue that still hadn't been resolved, about a parcel that was delayed. It was a dance we both knew by heart, a way of keeping things functioning without touching the deeper currents. I busied myself with the house, the garden, and painting. I was starting to find a strange comfort in the solitude, not because it was peaceful, but because it forced me to sit with myself. To feel everything I'd been avoiding for so long. It was during one of these late afternoons, while I was sketching a crooked line of trees from memory, that I felt the pull again. Not toward him exactly, but toward something I couldn't yet name, a version of myself I hadn't allowed to breathe. I stepped outside, needing air. The breeze was cooler than I expected, and I pulled my sweater tighter around me. I walked aimlessly at first, then found my feet leading me toward the edge of the woods behind the houses. He was there. I saw him before he saw me, standing at the tree line with his hands in his pockets, looking out over the field beyond. I nearly turned around, but he caught sight of me and raised a hand. There was no plan, no reason for us to be there at the same time. But I kept walking until I reached him. "It's quiet out here," he said. "It is," I agreed, not sure what else to say. We stood side by side, looking out over the fading grass, the trees beginning to turn. The wind shifted. He asked if I wanted to see something, and I said yes before thinking. He led me along a narrow trail I hadn't noticed before, one that twisted through the trees until we reached a small clearing. At the far end stood an old wooden structure, not quite a cabin, more like a shed that had long ago given up trying to hold itself together. "It used to be part of the old farm," he explained. "Abandoned now." We stepped inside. The door creaked but held. The space smelled of dust and pine. Slats of light broke through the gaps in the roof, painting stripes on the floor. It was empty except for a broken chair, a pile of branches, and a worn rug in the corner. I don't know why I felt it then, the wave of emotion that rose without warning. Maybe it was the place itself, forgotten by time, or maybe it was standing beside someone who had never once asked me to be anything but who I was in that moment. I sat on the edge of the rug, letting the silence settle. He sat across from me, legs crossed, his elbows resting on his knees. "You don't have to say anything," he said after a long pause. I thought you might like it here." I looked around, absorbing the way the light moved across the floor, the quiet creak of the wood above us. It was a space suspended in time, untouched by demands, by roles, by expectations. "I do," I whispered. "Like it here." We didn't speak much after that. We just sat, listening to the wind push gently against the old walls. And for the first time in weeks, I felt still, not numb, not overwhelmed. Just still. When we left, it was already growing dark. He walked me back through the trees, stopping at the edge of my yard. "I'll see you around," he said. I nodded, and we parted without another word. That night, back in the guest room, I opened my sketchbook again. This time, I drew the light as it had fallen through the wooden beams, the cracks in the walls, the shape of him seated in that abandoned space, not as a man, but as a presence. There was a peace to it I couldn't explain. A sense that something had begun, though I didn't yet know what. Something not about him, but about what I had allowed myself to feel. About the choice I hadn't made, but could. The days that followed blurred into one another like muted shades of gray. My husband's calls continued to be brief, polite, and filled with nothing of substance. His work was demanding, he told me, and it seemed that was all there was to talk about. The longer he stayed away, the more I withdrew into myself. I spent my time in the garden, in the guest room where I painted, or wandering through the house. Each room felt like a reflection of my own state, once vibrant, now slowly withering. I found comfort in routine, in small tasks that allowed me to forget, if only for a while, what was beginning to weigh on me. But there were moments when it all came rushing back. The weight of what had happened. What I had allowed to happen. The kiss, the touches, the silence that followed. It was as if the house itself had become a witness to something I couldn't undo. That afternoon, he came again. This time, it was a simple excuse, a question about the fence at the back of the property. His words were casual, but the air between us was thick with something else, something we didn't speak. He didn't enter the house, but his presence at the gate seemed to linger even after he left. I tried to push the thoughts aside, telling myself it was just a neighborly interaction, nothing more. But it wasn't that simple. I couldn't deny what I was feeling, what had been set in motion. Later that evening, as the sky darkened and the house grew colder, I stood by the window. I watched the trees sway in the wind, their branches creaking, bending under the weight of the air. The garden was quiet, still. I could almost hear the beating of my own heart, faster than usual. I had been avoiding him, keeping my distance, but I knew it was only a matter of time before I would have to face what had been left unsaid. I didn't have the strength to deny it anymore. I needed to understand what was happening to me, what I was becoming. He was standing near the gate again the next morning. This time, I didn't hesitate. I stepped outside, pulling my sweater tighter against the chill. He turned when he heard the door open, and his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. But I noticed it. There was a recognition in his eyes, a shared understanding that hung in the space between us. "I was wondering if you needed help with the roses," he said, his voice steady. I looked at him, unsure how to respond, but the words came before I could stop them. "Yes. I could use some help with them." He nodded and walked over to the garden. I followed, feeling the weight of each step. It was as if the ground beneath me had softened, become unstable. We worked in silence, the sound of pruning shears cutting through the stillness. His hands were steady, sure, and I couldn't help but watch the way he moved. His presence was impossible to ignore now, not just because he was physically close, but because of what had already transpired between us. I was acutely aware of his proximity, the way our movements seemed to sync without effort. Each time I reached for a branch, his hand brushed mine. Each time I stood, I felt his gaze on me. It wasn't the kind of attention that made me uncomfortable, it was something more subtle, more unsettling. At one point, I stopped and wiped my brow with the back of my hand. The air felt thicker, heavier. When I looked up, I saw him watching me. Not with expectation, but with something else, something unreadable. "You've been avoiding me," he said, breaking the silence between us. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words didn't come. Instead, I simply nodded. It was true. I had been avoiding him, avoiding the truth. "I didn't mean to," I said softly. I didn't know what to do." He stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine. There was no judgment in his gaze, no anger. Just understanding, as though he already knew everything I was too afraid to say. "You don't have to explain it," he said quietly. But I needed to. The words had been building inside me, pushing against the walls I had carefully constructed. "I'm not happy," I admitted. "Not the way I thought I would be. Not the way I used to be." He didn't reply right away, but I could feel his presence deepening, as though he was allowing me to breathe out the truth. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I continued, my voice breaking slightly. "But I don't know how to stop feeling this way." He reached out then, his hand gently resting on my arm. "You don't have to stop feeling anything. Just take your time." I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the quiet. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the weight of the house pressing in on me. The air between us was still, but it didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt like a space where I could exhale. I opened my eyes to find him still standing there, his hand still on my arm. The distance between us had narrowed, and I wondered if we both understood that there would be no going back. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "You don't need to apologize," he replied, his voice low and reassuring. "We're all just trying to figure it out." We stood there for a long while, the garden around us forgotten. The roses we had been pruning remained half-finished, their tangled branches reaching toward the sky. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something stir inside me, not the guilt I had been carrying, but the faintest trace of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to be whole again. Not for anyone else, but for myself. The wind picked up again, and I turned away, taking a step back. "Thank you," I said. He didn't need to say anything in return. We both knew that the conversation had already shifted, that the words spoken between us had changed something. But I didn't know yet what that something would be. All I knew was that I was no longer as afraid of what I might find if I allowed myself to feel. I walked back toward the house, the weight of the moment still pressing against my chest. I didn't look back. But I knew he was still there, in the garden, as much a part of this house as I was now. And that realization settled deep within me, a quiet, undeniable truth that I didn't fully understand yet. But I would. In time. The weeks continued to move in quiet succession. Each day blended into the next, and with each passing moment, I felt myself slipping further into the space I had carved out for myself. The house no longer felt entirely empty, nor did it feel full. It had become something else, a place of holding, a space for everything unsaid and unresolved. I painted more often, and with every brushstroke, I felt a piece of the weight I carried inside me loosen. The lines weren't perfect, the colors didn't always match, but each canvas became a quiet confession. I hadn't realized how much I needed to express myself until I found the courage to pick up a brush again. He came around less frequently, and that absence made the house feel more like it used to, before any of this had started. I almost welcomed it. I told myself that I needed the space to figure things out, to understand the consequences of my own choices. But part of me couldn't let go. The other part, the one that was afraid, wanted him there. I wasn't sure if it was just the relief of his presence, or something more. One afternoon, I received a message from my husband, asking if I was free to talk. He had a window of time between meetings and wanted to check in. The timing of it struck me. The questions had always been surface level before, but now, there was something about the way he phrased it that felt different. I couldn't quite explain why, but I knew it wasn't just a casual check-in. I sat with that message for a while, debating what to say. It had been days since we had last spoken in person, and each day that passed seemed to blur the distance between us even more. I was no longer the same person I had been when he left, and part of me was afraid to face the reality of it all. But another part of me knew that I couldn't avoid it any longer. I typed a quick response, "I'm free." "What's up?" He called shortly after. His voice came through the phone, steady but tinged with something I hadn't heard in months, concern. We talked about the usual things at first, work, the house, small updates. But then there was a silence between us, one that felt thick, pregnant with words that neither of us knew how to say. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice softer now. "I've been thinking about us, about how we've been. It feels like something is missing." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to spill the weight of the past few weeks, the turmoil I had been wrestling with. But the words didn't come. Instead, I found myself nodding, as if he could see me, as if he could sense the hesitation in me. "I know I've been distant," he continued. "And I'm sorry for that. I've been so caught up with work, I haven't been present. I haven't been there for you like I should have." The apology, though unspoken, hung in the air like a confession. He was right. He hadn't been present. But neither had I, not in the way that truly mattered. We both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it settling between us. Then, in a voice I didn't recognize, I asked, "Do you think we're still the same?" It was a question I hadn't intended to ask, but one that had been gnawing at me for days. I knew the answer before he gave it, but I needed to hear him say it. "I don't know," he replied, his voice thick with uncertainty. I want to believe we can be. But it feels like we're strangers sometimes. Like we're living in parallel lives. That hit harder than I expected. It wasn't the words themselves, but the way they reflected something I had been avoiding. I wasn't just living in a parallel life, I had created a life that didn't involve him. I had built walls so high around myself that I wasn't sure how to tear them down. Maybe we've been afraid of facing it, I said, almost to myself. Afraid of what? He asked, his tone more cautious now. Afraid of what might happen if we really looked at where we are. What we've become. There was a long pause. It felt like the air had thickened between us, as if the conversation had cracked something wide open. I've been afraid too, he said finally, his voice quieter now. Afraid of losing us. Of losing what we had. I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't know if it was too late for us to find our way back. But I also didn't know if I could go back. I think I need some time to think, I said. About everything. I understand, he replied. I need you to know I'm here. I want to work on this. If you do, too. I'm not sure if I'm ready, I said, my voice trembling slightly. But I'll try. We hung up after that, and I sat in the silence of the room, trying to digest what had just transpired. It wasn't the reconciliation I had imagined, but it felt like a step forward, or at least a step closer to understanding what was happening between us. Later that evening, after the phone call had faded from my mind, I stood in the kitchen and stared at the space he had occupied when he visited earlier. There was an emptiness there now, one that hadn't been there before. But it wasn't the emptiness of the house. It was the emptiness of a life that had been put on hold. The conversation with my husband had stirred something inside me, something I hadn't fully recognized until now. The desire to be seen, to be known, was still alive within me. But was it too late to find that again with him? And if it was, what did that mean for me, for us? I didn't have answers. But as I stood there, watching the light fade from the sky, I knew I had to face those questions, no matter how uncomfortable they made me. The house felt quieter than it had in days. I didn't know why, but the silence seemed more profound, more intense, as if it had taken on a weight that I could no longer ignore. My husband's absence had been filled with so many small things, the distant hum of his work calls, the clutter of his briefcase, his sudden arrival and departure. But now, in the void of those sounds, I was left with nothing but the echo of my own thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had irrevocably shifted. The conversation with my husband had left me unsettled, uncertain about everything. He wanted to work things out, but could I? Could I return to the woman I was when we first met, before all the cracks started to appear, before the air between us became thick with unspoken words? I didn't know. What if I didn't want to? The garden had become my refuge. The routine of tending to the flowers, pulling weeds from the earth, felt grounding in ways I couldn't explain. It was in the act of caring for something else that I found a temporary peace, a moment of escape from the whirlwind of emotions I had been trying to suppress. But even there, in the quiet hum of nature, I couldn't help but feel his presence lingering. He had been coming around less, as if sensing the shift, as if he knew that I needed space to figure things out. But when he did come, it was always with a quiet ease, never pushing, never demanding. And yet, each time he spoke, each time his hand brushed mine or his eyes lingered just a moment too long, I felt a pull that I couldn't explain. One evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and pinks, he appeared again at the garden gate. He was carrying a basket of fresh vegetables, his expression as unreadable as ever. I didn't know what to say. There had been so many moments between us, moments I couldn't take back, and now I was left with nothing but the rawness of my own feelings. I brought these for you, he said, his voice steady. Thought you might like them. I nodded, accepting the basket without a word. The weight of it felt like a reminder of everything that had passed between us, of everything that could still be left unspoken. He stood there, not quite in the garden, but not entirely out of it either, as though waiting for something. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching mine for some sign of what was going on inside me. I paused before answering, unsure of how to put it into words. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice quiet. "I don't know what to feel anymore." He didn't move. He didn't step forward or reach for me. Instead, he just stood there, letting my words hang in the air between us. For a moment, I thought I might say something more, something that would finally make sense of everything. But the words never came. Instead, I turned away and started to walk back toward the house. He didn't follow me, and I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel him standing there, just beyond the gate, watching me leave. It was the kind of moment that didn't need to be spoken aloud. The weight of it was enough. Inside, I set the basket down on the kitchen counter, the vegetables still warm from the sun. I didn't know how much longer I could keep this up. The distance, the silence, the constant tension between what I wanted and what I knew I couldn't have. It was becoming unbearable. I walked into the living room and sat down on the couch, staring at the walls as if they might hold the answers. The house had always been a home to me, but now it felt like a place of confinement. The walls seemed to close in on me, the air heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. The phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me from my thoughts. It was a message from my husband. "I'll be home soon. I miss you." The words were simple, but they hit me like a punch to the stomach. I felt a pang of guilt, a rush of emotion that I wasn't sure how to handle. I missed him, too, in a way. But it was different now. The space between us was too wide, too deep, and I didn't know how to cross it. I typed a quick reply, something neutral, something that wouldn't make either of us face the truth. "I miss you, too. Can't wait to see you." As soon as I sent it, I regretted it. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. I didn't know what I was waiting for, what I expected to happen. But I knew, deep down, that things were changing. That they had already changed. I stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the quiet yard. The garden, the house, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. I could feel the weight of my own choices pressing down on me, suffocating me with the knowledge that things could never go back to the way they were. I wasn't sure what the future held. I wasn't even sure what I wanted it to hold. But one thing was certain, I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight lift from my chest. The air was cooler, fresher. I took a deep breath, letting the coolness fill my lungs. I didn't have all the answers. But I knew I was ready to find them. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. He came home on a Thursday. The sun had just dipped low enough to paint the tops of the trees in gold when I heard the gravel shift under the tires of his car. I was standing in the kitchen at the time, rinsing out a glass, and my hands froze mid-motion. For a moment, I simply stood there, listening to the familiar sound of the engine cutting off, the door closing, the weight of his steps approaching the house. I hadn't prepared for this moment. I thought I had, telling myself that when he returned, I would know what to say. That I'd find clarity, that everything would make sense. But instead, the silence filled my chest like smoke. The front door opened. I didn't turn to greet him right away. He called my name softly, not in question, just to say it out loud, to announce his return. I heard his suitcase roll across the floor, the gentle thud of it stopping in the hallway. When I finally turned, he was standing there, tired, a little paler than usual, but smiling. The sight of him brought a flood of emotions I hadn't anticipated, nostalgia, guilt, grief, and a strange sense of mourning for the simplicity we'd once had. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. I let him. My hands rested lightly on his back, unsure of what to do, unsure of what I felt. The embrace lasted just long enough to feel obligatory. "I missed you," he said. "I know," I replied. And I did know. But what I didn't say was that I had missed something else more, the version of myself that had started to reawaken in his absence. We spent the evening together, doing what couples do when they've been apart, sharing a meal, exchanging updates about mundane things, work, neighbors, small repairs around the house. He seemed eager to slip back into routine, to rebuild something that had quietly unraveled. But beneath the normalcy, something had shifted. I could see it in the way his eyes lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking. In the way he hesitated before speaking, as if he was holding back questions he didn't yet know how to ask. We sat in the living room after dinner. He stretched out on the couch with a familiarity that felt foreign to me now. I took the armchair, folding one leg under myself, staring into the dim glow of the floor lamp. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he broke the silence. "You've changed," he said. I looked at him, not pretending to misunderstand. "Yes." He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer but still didn't know what to do with it. "Not in a bad way," he added quickly. "Just, something's different." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was too complex to explain. I had changed, not into someone else, but back into someone I hadn't been in years. He didn't push further, and for that, I was grateful. Later that night, we lay in the same bed, inches apart, the sheets a barrier more than a comfort. His breathing settled into the slow rhythm of sleep, while mine remained shallow, restless. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock on the dresser, trying to decide what was more painful, the distance we shared or the closeness we pretended to have. The next morning, he left early for an appointment. I watched him from the front window as he backed out of the driveway. There was no hug, no kiss goodbye. Just a wave, and the sound of tires crunching gravel. I stayed inside most of the morning. The house, for all its familiarity, felt tighter than usual. I needed air. Space. Something to remind me I was still here, still breathing. I found myself walking without thinking, down the path behind the house, past the trees, to the old clearing. The broken-down shed stood as it always had, leaning slightly to one side, defiant against time. He was already there. I wasn't surprised. Part of me knew I would find him here, just as I had the last time. He didn't speak when he saw me. Just stood up slowly and waited. We stepped inside together. The quiet between us was different now. It wasn't charged with possibility. It was filled with the weight of reality. He watched me for a long time, his hands at his sides, his eyes steady. "Are you all right?" he asked. I nodded. Then shook my head. "No. I don't know. I thought I was. But now." He didn't interrupt. He waited. "I thought I could come back to my life like nothing had changed," I continued, my voice low, breaking in places. "But it has. I have. And now I don't know where I belong." He stepped closer, not touching me, not closing the distance entirely. Just enough to make his presence known. "You don't have to have the answers today." The words were simple, but they cracked something inside me. I turned away from him, wrapping my arms around myself as if to hold everything in. "You've given me something," I said after a moment. "Not because you meant to. But because you reminded me I'm still capable of feeling. Of wanting." He looked down, and I could see the tension in his posture. "And now?" "I don't know," I said. But I think I needed to say that. I think I needed to see it clearly. We stood there for a long while, the light filtering through the broken roof, painting lines across the floor. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't try to pull me closer. He just listened. When I finally turned to leave, he didn't stop me. I walked home slowly, the wind pulling at my sleeves, the sky darkening overhead. I wasn't running anymore. Not from my husband. Not from the man I'd grown close to. Not from myself. I had made a choice, even if I didn't know what it meant yet. And that choice was to be honest. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the lights had gone out, a single candle burning beside me. I took out my sketchbook, opened to a clean page, and began to draw. Not the garden. Not the trees. Not the man I had kissed. I drew myself. Not as I had been, not as I was supposed to be, but as I was. In all my quiet confusion. In all my imperfection. In all my truth. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't flinch from what I saw. The morning light had already started to creep through the curtains by the time I woke up. My husband's side of the bed was empty, the sheets still neatly tucked in, as if he had never slept there. I reached over to his pillow instinctively, but the cold, smooth fabric reminded me of the distance that had been growing between us for weeks. It wasn't just the space in the bed. It was the space in the air, the silence that had stretched further and further until I didn't know how to fill it anymore. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, letting the thoughts swirl around my mind. I had told him that I would try, that I would be open to working on our marriage. But the truth was, I didn't know what that even meant anymore. How could I rebuild something that had felt like it had been crumbling for so long? And even if I could, would I still want to? I pulled myself out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor with a soft thud. The house was quiet, and for a moment, I wondered if I was the only one awake. The weight of it all pressed against my chest, the guilt, the confusion, the ache of not knowing what I wanted or where I was headed. I didn't hear him come in. I only realized he was back when I walked into the kitchen and saw him standing there, his hands on the counter, staring down at something. His posture was rigid, his back turned to me, but I could tell something was off. "Hey," I said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned slowly, his eyes tired but not angry. "Hey," he replied, his voice distant, like he was already miles away. There was a long pause between us, thick with unspoken words. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something fragile, and if I said the wrong thing, it would shatter. He exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "I spoke to the lawyer today," he said, his voice flat. The words hit me like a slap. My heart skipped, and for a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. I blinked, trying to find my voice. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've started looking at options. For separation," he said, his gaze drifting to the window, not meeting my eyes. I stood there, frozen, as his words sank in. Separation. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. This was what I had been afraid of, what I had been avoiding. The quiet unraveling of everything I had known, everything I had built. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "I don't want this," he said, his voice shaking just slightly. "I don't want to lose you. But I don't know how we come back from this. From whatever this is between us now." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. "I don't know either," I said. "I don't know if we can." The silence between us was thick, suffocating. We were two people standing in the same room, yet a world apart. He wasn't angry. He wasn't blaming me. But the hurt in his eyes was undeniable. And I knew, deep down, that this was the beginning of the end. He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out, but he stopped himself before touching me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry too," I replied, my throat tight. The apology didn't feel like enough. It never did. It wasn't just about what we had done or hadn't done. It was about everything that had led us to this point, the missed connections, the unspoken words, the distance that had grown between us. And now, standing here, I realized that maybe it was too late to fix any of it. "I think I need to go for a walk," I said suddenly, needing to escape the tension that was suffocating me. "Okay," he said, his voice distant again. I grabbed my jacket and left without saying another word. I didn't know where I was going or what I was hoping to find. I just needed to be away from the house, away from the weight of his disappointment and my own guilt. I wandered through the quiet streets, my mind racing. I had thought that by telling him the truth, by being honest about what I felt, it would bring us closer. But instead, it had pushed us even further apart. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know if it could be fixed. As I walked, I found myself at the edge of the woods again, the place where I had met him so many days ago. The air was cooler now, the trees casting long shadows on the ground. I stood there for a moment, taking in the stillness. This was the place where everything had changed. And now, standing here again, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. I hadn't expected to find him here again, but there he was. He was standing just at the edge of the clearing, his hands in his pockets, staring out at the trees. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just watched as I walked toward him. "I didn't mean to follow you," he said quietly. I wanted to make sure you were okay." I stopped a few feet away from him, unsure of what to say. "I don't know if I'm okay," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "I get that." There was a long silence between us, and for a moment, I thought he might walk away, just like the others had. But he didn't. Instead, he took a step closer, his hand reaching out. "Do you want to talk?" he asked, his voice gentle. I didn't know how to answer that. How could I explain everything that had happened? How could I put into words the confusion, the guilt, the fear? I wanted to, but I didn't have the words. "I don't know what we're doing anymore," I said finally. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, like he was waiting for me to say more. "I don't know what comes next," I added. "Neither do I," he said, his voice steady. "But maybe we don't have to figure it all out right now." I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. It was a strange kind of comfort, the idea that we didn't have to have all the answers right away. "I don't want to lose you," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to lose you either," I replied, my throat tight. We stood there for a long time, not saying anything more. The world around us seemed to hold its breath, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel the warmth of his presence again, the connection that had always been there, buried beneath everything else. But as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ground, I knew that this moment wasn't the end. It was just another step, another piece of the puzzle that we were both trying to put together. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if we would ever finish it. But I wasn't ready to give up just yet. The weeks after that conversation passed slowly, each day a quiet battle between old habits and new truths. There were moments when I felt as if I had finally stepped into the life I was meant to live, moments when I could breathe easily, when I could smile without forcing it. But they were brief, fleeting moments, often interrupted by the reality of my marriage and the confusion that lingered between us. My husband and I spent less time talking. The distance between us grew, though neither of us ever acknowledged it directly. He became more consumed with his work, spending long hours in the office or on calls, leaving me alone to fill the hours. I knew he could feel the change, even if he didn't say it out loud. But I couldn't help him fix something I wasn't sure I could fix myself. The house was quiet again, but this time, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like emptiness, like we were both trying to fill a void we didn't understand. I spent my days alone in the garden, in the guest room where I painted, and in the long stretches of time that passed between us, unsure of how to bridge the gap that had opened up so suddenly. Then one evening, as the sun began to set and the air grew cooler, I found myself standing at the edge of the garden again. It wasn't a conscious decision, my feet had simply taken me there, as if my body knew where I needed to be. I stood in the same spot where I had first kissed him, the man who had come into my life in the most unexpected way. He wasn't there this time. But his absence wasn't a relief. It was a reminder of everything I had tried to escape, the connection, the desire, the confusion. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Or rather, that I was missing someone. I hadn't seen him in days, and something about the quietness between us unsettled me. I had convinced myself that I was ready to move on, to return to the life I had before he came into it. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. Not anymore. The doorbell rang just as I was about to go back inside. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I opened the door anyway. There he stood, the same man who had shared so many quiet moments with me in the past few weeks. He looked almost hesitant, as if unsure of what he was about to say. "I needed to see you," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. "I've been thinking, a lot. About everything." I stepped aside to let him in, unsure of what to expect. He didn't sit down right away. Instead, he stood there for a moment, looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "I've been trying to figure out where we go from here," he said, finally meeting my gaze. "I don't want to push you. I don't want to make things harder than they already are. But I can't keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not. Not with you." His words struck a chord deep inside me. I wanted to deny them, to tell him that I was fine, that everything would work out in the end. But I couldn't. The truth was, I wasn't fine. And I wasn't sure how to fix it. "I don't know what to do anymore," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I don't know what I'm supposed to want." He stepped closer, his hand reaching out in a gesture of comfort. "You don't have to know. Not right now. I just needed you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." I wanted to pull away, to close myself off again, but something inside me broke. I couldn't keep pushing him away. I couldn't keep pretending like I wasn't falling apart. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to hurt you." He shook his head, his expression softening. "You're not hurting me. You're not the one who's been hurting." I didn't understand what he meant at first. But then it hit me, he wasn't talking about me. He was talking about himself. About the pain he had been carrying, the fear of losing me. And suddenly, I understood. I wasn't the only one who had been struggling. We both had been. We had both been living in this strange, silent space, unable to reach each other, unable to understand what was happening. And now, for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally seeing him. "I don't know what comes next," I said, my voice trembling. "But I think I'm ready to find out." He smiled then, a small, tentative smile. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't an answer. But it was enough. We stood there for a long while, neither of us saying anything more. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't filled with questions or doubts. It was simply a space to breathe, to exist together without the weight of expectations. "I think we're both lost right now," he said finally, his voice quiet. "But maybe we can figure it out together." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle inside me. We didn't have the answers, and maybe we never would. But for the first time, I felt like we were no longer alone in our confusion. I think I'd like that, I whispered. We didn't need to say anything else. The moment was enough. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be okay again.